Hey guys, tonight we will step into a world where flickering candles cast shadows on cold stone walls. And the atmosphere is so heavy that even the most seasoned envoys could barely stand firm. Picture a radiant queen on her throne, jeweils glittering, her words sharp as a blade, but the moment she parts her lips, the entire chamber trembles at a stench no amount of perfume could mask. This isn't some fireside fable. It's a chilling truth, hidden beneath layers of velvet and powdered masks. And trust me, you'll barely survive this story without wrinkling your nose at least once. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Where you are, is it the still silence of midnight? Or the busy hours of the day sneaking into your earbuds? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself walking into an English palace of the 16th century. Crimson velvet curtains hang low. Colored glass scatters jeweled light across the stone floor. And footsteps echo down endless corridors. The air is heavy with incense, dried roses, and something unpleasant, like fruit left too long in a corner. That was the paradox of Elizabeth I's reign, dazzling brilliance on the outside. But secrets within that made courtiers both fascinated and unsettled. You might smile and think a queen that powerful surely lived in polished luxury, caring for every detail of her appearance. Right. But the truth is, if you were invited to her banquet, you might pray for your sense of smell to take a short vacation. Here's the official history to remember. Elizabeth I reigned for 45 years, from the year 1558 to 1603, and turned the Tudor dynasty into a golden age, defeating even the mighty Spanish Armada. She was a political icon, a woman bold enough to defy the Pope, and a beacon who elevated English arts and literature with Shakespeare reaching his peak. But behind that glorious throne, her private life was full of bizarre habits. One little-known fact, Elizabeth's teeth turned black early on. Not from tobacco, still rare at the time, but from sugar. Yes, sugar. The everyday treat we put in bubble tea, cakes, and ice cream was then a symbol of wealth. Common folk could go a lifetime without tasting it. But the Queen was addicted, until her mouth became a mini graveyard of rotting teeth. A Spanish envoy once complained that speaking with her felt like breathing smoke from a dying torch. Historians still debate how accurate these accounts are. Some argue they were Catholic propaganda, meant to slander a Protestant queen. Yet records from within England admitted that her decayed teeth made eating painful. One tale says when her physician suggested extracting some, she forced him to pull out his own tooth first, to prove it wouldn't hurt. He did, then fainted from the pain, while Elizabeth only smiled proudly. A medical reality show centuries ahead of its time. Now picture her meals instead of roasted meats or crisp bread. The royal kitchen had to prepare thin porridge and stewed meats, so soft they needed no chewing. That's why some scholars claim Elizabethan banquets, though lavish in appearance, were rather bland. A greyish chicken stew on golden plates might have been no tastier than instant noodles at midnight. But the teeth were only the beginning. Did you know? Elizabeth almost never bathed. It sounds strange, but in those days people feared that water could seep into the skin and damage the organs. Elizabeth turned this belief into a life philosophy. She dreaded water so much that she bathed only a few times a year, and each occasion was a ritual. Roses, lavender, warm water, clouds of incense, even a priest's prayer before she entered the tub. But afterward, she didn't change the water. She just added more perfume and fresh flowers. Imagine sitting in a pot of stale rose soup for hours. Romantic hardly. Pity the servants outside, probably breathing through their mouths. Modern scholars still debate, was she truly afraid of water? Or were these exaggerated anecdotes? Some say, given the plagues and pollution of the era, avoiding frequent baths was reasonable. Others believe Elisabeth's aversion came from her battle with smallpox, which left scars and made her wary of anything touching her skin. And of course, in a court where royalty had to preserve an immortal aura, masking reality with perfume and cosmetics became her shield. At this point, you might chuckle if Elisabeth lived today. She'd probably fall for every skincare and fragrance ad, no less than we do scrolling TikTok. She might have been a VIP customer of luxury brands, posting unboxing lead powder with lilac scent reels on Instagram. Sadly, her makeup really was made of lead and mercury substances that would send us running at first mention today. It was those very chemicals, day after day, that turned Elisabeth's face into a mask, pale, cracked, and eventually stiff, no longer moving with ease. People said that even Shakespeare, when writing plays for her, had to choose words that required less emphasis on pronunciation, because her voice had grown distorted. You see, power can change history, but it is helpless against a decayed tooth or a layer of poisonous lead on the skin. Perhaps you are wondering, how could someone with death breath, wigs that stank, and a cracked, rigid face still be celebrated as the eternal queen? Yet that was the true power of image. Elisabeth's portraits always shone her skin, porcelain white, her teeth perfectly even, her hair blazing red, her presence commanding. Painters of the time knew well to paint reality was to risk one's life, so portraits became propaganda tools, immortalizing her image, even when in reality she was exhausted. Doesn't that feel familiar today, when social media photos glow with filters, while reality, well, best not to mention, by now, do you hear the fan spinning steadily in your room? That rhythm is a reminder that history, too, turns in circles, glamour on the outside, secrets buried within, and the price of illusion paid in silence. Elisabeth I was not just a figure in textbooks, but living proof of the tension between power and human frailty. Close your eyes and imagine yourself seated in the grand hall of Hampton Court. The air is stifling with heavy scents. Candle flicker, silk gowns rustle. Before you stands a majestic queen, smiling brightly. But when a breeze drifts through, you realize the fragrance is not roses, but the creeping trace of decay beneath velvet, and this is only the beginning of a strange journey, where splendor and rot walk hand in hand like a tragicomedy. And you know, Elisabeth I's hair was no less of a scandal. In her youth, she possessed flaming red hair, a rare and striking color that immediately evoked boldness and strength, but the constant application of lead, mercury, and perfumed oils on her scalp caused her hair to fall out in clumps. By middle age, the queen was nearly bald. Thus, the solution arose: wigs. It sounds simple, but Elizabeth's wigs were nothing like the cheap plastic ones on today's online shops. They were elaborate creations made from horsehair, goat hair, even human hair, rumors claimed. Some came from ladies in waiting, or even corpses. They were fixed in place with paste made of animal fat, eggs, and starch, then dusted with white powder to match the pallor of her lead-painted skin. The result? An architectural structure on her head, heavy with symbolism, hiding the grim truth beneath. The historical fact here is that Elisabeth truly owned dozens of wigs and regarded them as royal treasures. Each time she appeared at court, she performed a solemn ritual of selection, sometimes even requiring a priest to bless the wig before it was placed upon her head. Some were so large that chapel doorways had to be altered so she could enter without getting stuck. A curious detail. Less widely known, those wigs were said to be home to colonies of lice. The heat, sweat, and starch created the perfect breeding ground. One servant supposedly confessed with a shudder that when lifting a wig from her head, he saw white maggots wriggling near the scalp. Of course, no one dared speak of it. One word could mean exile to Cornwall. Historians still debate whether the tale of parasitic wigs was Catholic propaganda from foreign envoys, or a gruesome reality. Some diplomatic reports from Italy and Spain did indeed mention an odour from her head, but there is no direct proof of crawling larvae. Still, considering hygiene and hairdressing methods of the era, the image is not entirely far-fetched. Now imagine each morning a small army of attendants fussing over her wigs, one applying perfume, another dusting on white powder, another adjusting metal pins to hold it steady. The smell in the chamber must have resembled a perfume stall mixed with damp cloth, and Elisabeth sat upright, unmoving, as this crown was assembled, a towering monument on her head. If you think wearing a helmet all day is uncomfortable, try imagining a wig weighing nearly 10 kilograms, with a strong gust of wind. The risk of a broken neck was not at all unthinkable. I must slip in a joke to help you sleep. Perhaps if Elisabeth lived in the modern age, she would be a VIP client at a nail hair salon, and hairstylists would need to sign insurance contracts before daring to touch the royal wigs. Yet wigs were only one of many masks. The toxic cosmetics were what killed her slowly. White lead powder, red mercury-based lipstick, eyeliner of ash, all turned her face into a living statue. It was said that by the end of her life, even the lightest smile made the makeup crack and flake, like plaster falling from an old wall. Still, Elisabeth clung to that immortal image, for to her, beauty was power, and a crack on the skin was no different from a crack on the throne. Another official fact: Elisabeth contracted smallpox at the age of 29, which left pitted scars on her face. That was the reason for her obsession with white powder, the only mask that allowed her to believe she was still intact. But modern medical researchers affirm that it was the lead powder itself that caused symptoms such as trembling hands, insomnia, paranoia, and even liver failure. Some argue that her late-life rages and excessive suspicion were directly linked to heavy metal poisoning, a strange detail at the end of her life. She ordered all mirrors removed from the palace. No one, not even herself, was allowed to see the truth beneath the makeup. Only portraits, of course, retouched to the maximum filter, were permitted to record her likeness. Put humorously, Elisabeth was the very first influencer, living through edited images and leaving posterity with a profile as polished as today's Instagram. Historians still debate, did she truly believe cosmetics would make her immortal? Or was it simply a political strategy to maintain the image of the Virgin Queen? Either way, the price she paid was clear: a body worn down, skin ulcerated, real hair gone, and a mind drifting into delusion. Now, relax a little, breathe in deeply, then exhale. The fan hums steadily, like the heartbeat of history telling you its tale. Each detail may seem like something from long ago, yet they echo in our modern world, where appearances are always prioritized over inner truth. Elisabeth I, powerful as she was, could not escape that cycle. And it was those wigs and powders that made her an icon, both radiant and decayed. Picture the final days of Elisabeth I. The palace was silent. No bustling footsteps, nor flattering songs. The queen who once symbolized a golden age now lay on her bed, eyes wide open, lips pressed tight, refusing food or rest. She whispered to her courtiers, "If I close my eyes, I shall never open them again." And indeed, her prophecy came true. The official historical fact: Elisabeth died in March of the year 1603. After 45 years of rule, her death ended the illustrious Tudor dynasty and opened the way for the Stuarts, with James I, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. Her passing was not only the close of an era, but the beginning of England's new age of overseas expansion and empire. But the story did not end there. A little-known detail: Elizabeth's body decayed so quickly, it threw the court into panic. A grand funeral had been prepared, but only days after her death, the corpse began to swell, see up black fluids, and release such an overpowering stench that even her most loyal attendants covered their noses and turned away. Priests burned incense constantly, sprinkled vinegar beneath the coffin, and scattered herbs. But it was all in vain. Guards were rotated every 10 minutes because they could not endure the smell. Some said flies swarmed around the coffin as if the funeral had turned into a fish market. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth's body really decompose so rapidly due to the lead and mercury she had absorbed all her life? Or was it exaggeration by her enemies? Some modern medical evidence suggests that heavy metal poisoning can damage organs and accelerate decomposition after death. Others argue that the delay in her funeral rites and London's damp climate hastened the odour. Now imagine the funeral procession through the main streets of London. Citizens wept on both sides, waving white cloths, believing they were bidding farewell to an immortal queen. Yet the soldiers escorting her were pale-faced, changing shifts constantly to avoid fainting from the stench. A scene both tragic and grotesque, like a Shakespearean play, with a decidedly unpoetic ending. I must add another joke to lighten the mood if today there were royal funeral reviews on TripAdvisor. Elizabeth's might have earned only 2 stars, with comments such as, "Solemn atmosphere, beautiful music, but the smell, better left unmentioned." But you know, despite everything, the image of Elizabeth I has been preserved as that of a radiant queen. Portraits painted after her death still depicted a delicate face, smooth white skin, and a serene smile like that of a saint. The truth was hidden beneath wax, powder, lace, and silk, turning a decaying body into a holy icon. And that, in the end, reflected the very spirit of the age. Appearance was everything. Another official fact, Elizabeth was buried at Westminster Abbey, right beside her half-sister Mary I. The two had once been political rivals, one the Catholic Queen, the other the Virgin Queen of Protestant England. Yet, in bitter irony, they now rest side by side beneath the same stone vault. On their tomb was inscribed partners both in throne and grave. Here, rest we 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Mary. A sweet paradox, yet one steeped in sorrow. A strange detail for years. Rumours spread that Elizabeth's tomb exuded a sickly sweet fragrance, as if her powders and perfumes continued working even after she had turned to dust. A tomb guard at the abbey claimed that some pilgrims complained of headaches when lingering before her grave, and thus the tale of Elizabeth I's haunting scent endured. Historians debate, did her tomb truly leak a smell? Or was it only the product of folklore? Some insist there is no scientific proof. But as you know, history does not always require truth, only whispers strong enough to live on. Relax your shoulders now. Listen to the steady hum of the fan, and imagine above that cold tomb, hundreds of thousands of Londoners once knelt, weeping, believing their queen remained eternal. But beneath the marble lay only rotting bones, a strange lingering scent, and the story of a woman who chose powder over water, illusion over truth. Picture this before Elizabeth I became the legendary Virgin Queen. She was only a small child, born into a family where glory and darkness intertwined from the very start. And to understand why Elizabeth became one of the most enigmatic queens in European history, you must first know her origins, where love, power, and tragedy merged into a play without end. You see, Elizabeth was the daughter of Henry VIII, the most famous, and perhaps the most infamous, king in English history. A man remembered not only for his 6 marriages that shook Europe, but also for his habit of changing wives as easily as changing clothes. He was the king who tore England away from the Pope in Rome, creating the Church of England, just so he could divorce and remarry. Some joke that if Netflix had existed in the 16th century, The series The Wives of Henry VIII would have been a bigger hit than Game of Thrones. Elizabeth was born on September 7th, 1533, at Greenwich Palace. Her mother was Anne Boleyn, a young, intelligent, and beautiful woman, but also one of the most tragic figures in the tale of Henry VIII's love and power. It was Anne who bewitched the king, to the point that he risked everything, abandoning his first wife Catherine of Aragon, defying the Pope, and causing a religious crisis across Europe. A child born in such circumstances, could her fate ever have been peaceful? The official historical fact when Anne Boleyn gave birth to Elizabeth instead of a prince. Henry VIII was bitterly disappointed. In those days, England valued only sons for the throne, and in the eyes of an ambitious king, a daughter was little more than a curse. He had hoped Anne would provide a male saviour, but instead, a small red-haired girl arrived. Henry frowned, but he still had to stage a grand baptism. A little-known detail: Elizabeth was named after her grandmother, Elisabeth of York, the woman who united the houses of Lancaster and York after the Wars of the Roses. That name was a prophecy of sorts. The child would become a figure of unity, of healing, yet also burdened with the weight of Tudor destiny. Elizabeth's childhood was far from a fairy tale. From her earliest steps, she saw cold glances and heard whispers that she was unwanted. Her father was distant, her mother constantly under unbearable pressure at court. And then, tragedy struck like a sudden blade. Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, was accused of adultery, treason, even witchcraft. In the year 1536, when Elizabeth was only 2.5 years old, her mother was taken to the scaffold at the Tower of London and executed with a single stroke of the sword. Historians continue to debate these charges. Many believe Anne was framed, that Henry VIII simply wanted to rid himself of her in order to marry Jane Seymour, who would give birth to the Prince Edward. Others argue that Anne's ambition and cunning posed too great a threat to the throne. But whatever the truth, this tragedy left a mark that would shape Elizabeth's life forever. Imagine this: a little girl just learning to speak, suddenly stripped of her title as princess, declared a bastard, from Lady Elisabeth. She was demoted to nothing more than a common lady. From then on, she spent her early years under suspicion, pushed to the margins of the royal family. A little-known detail: because her mother had been executed, Elizabeth learned early on to hide her emotions. Once, when a servant asked her about Anne Boleyn, the child fell silent, then replied simply, "I have no mother." That short answer reflected the guardedness and the silent grief that would follow her throughout her life. Elizabeth's life afterward was a string of stepmothers changing like new versions of the iPhone. First, Jane Seymour, who died soon after giving birth to Prince Edward. Then Anne of Cleves' marriage annulled after 6 months. Catherine Howard executed for adultery. And finally, Catherine Parr, the last wife of Henry VIII. It was Catherine Parr who showed Elizabeth some affection and education, encouraging her to study languages, philosophy, and theology. Thanks to her, Elizabeth became one of the most learned queens in Europe, fluent in at least 6 languages. But the most haunting event was still her mother's death. Think about it. Growing up with the memory that your mother had been sent to the scaffold by your own father, how could a child ever believe in love or safety? Elizabeth learned a lesson etched into her soul in the world of power. Affection was only a pawn, and silence was safer than tears. Perhaps it was for this very reason that Elizabeth never married. Historians still debate, did she refuse marriage to preserve absolute power? Or was it because she could never overcome the ghost of her mother, the woman who had traded her love for King Henry for her own life? I must slip in a joke to help you breathe easier. If Elizabeth lived today, she would surely be the #1 anti-family drama person, stepping back the moment any drama appeared. Nope. I'm single. I'm at peace. Thanks. Do you hear the steady hum of the fan? Let it remind you that Elizabeth's life, from the moment she was born, spun like its blades rising, wobbling, falling, a child born to be cherished, yet quickly cast aside simply because she was not a boy. And yet, strangely enough, it was those forgotten, neglected years that forged Elisabeth's resilience. While others saw her as a thorn, she quietly studied, sharpened her words, observed politics. People said that even as a child she had bright, cautious eyes, the gaze of someone who knew that death might lurk at any moment. Another official fact after her mother's death: Elisabeth no longer had the chance to be close to her father. Henry VIII was preoccupied with his next marriages and affairs of state, but on the rare occasions he met his daughter, he still admitted that Elisabeth was intelligent and charming. Some courtiers even compared her to her mother, equally intelligent, equally sharp, and equally dangerous. Historians still debate, did Henry VIII truly love Elisabeth? Or did he see her only as a pawn to reinforce his image? Some records show that Henry once praised her in front of the court, but there are also sources that claim he never forgave Anne Boleyn, and that bitterness meant Elisabeth never received a father's love in full. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine little Elisabeth in her small dress, walking down the cold stone corridors of the palace, the sound of shoes on stone, the wind slipping through the windows, and one question carved deep into her young mind. Why did my mother have to die? No one answered. Only the silence of the court, and the cold shadow of a father who was both king and executioner. Elisabeth grew up in that silence, and perhaps it was that very pain which shaped the queen she would later become, a woman who preferred solitude over surrendering freedom. A woman who dared to face the entire world, yet never entrusted her heart completely to any man. The official historical fact after Henry VIII died in the year 1547, the throne passed to his only son, Edward VI, then only 9 years old. In the court, real power fell into the hands of male regents, while Elisabeth was merely a spare princess. However, the reign of Edward VI was still relatively safe for her. Elisabeth had the chance to study, immersing herself in humanist learning, theology, and foreign languages. It is said that she could read Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and even Spanish before the age of 15. Imagine that at an age when many today are still lost in TikTok, Elisabeth was already translating dry philosophical texts. But peace did not last long. When Edward VI died in the year 1553 of tuberculosis, the throne passed to Mary I, Elizabeth's half-sister, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Mary was famously devoutly Catholic and determined to return England to the authority of Rome, undoing the entire religious policy pursued by her father and by Elisabeth. For this reason, Mary saw Elisabeth bearing the blood of Anne Boleyn and symbolizing Protestantism as a mortal threat. A little-known detail: Mary I had once loved Elisabeth when they were both children, even caring for her younger sister. But as they grew older, that affection turned into suspicion. Mary once bluntly told her courtiers, "The daughter of a traitor can never be my loyal friend." The hatred for Anne Boleyn extended to Elisabeth. Elisabeth was just in her early 20s when she found herself caught in a deadly political play. In the year 1554, Wyatt's rebellion broke out, aiming to depose Mary and place Elisabeth on the throne. Though she had no part in it, Mary was certain her sister was involved, and so Elisabeth was taken to the Tower of London, the very place where 18 years earlier her mother had been imprisoned and executed. Historians still debate, was Elisabeth truly innocent? Or did she secretly have ties to the rebellion? Some evidence suggests she had corresponded with the rebels, but not enough to convict her. Many scholars believe that it was her clever answers and calm demeanor that saved her life. It is said that when she was led to the tower in the grey rain, Elisabeth declared, "I am innocent. Let God be my witness." Picture it: a young woman standing before the heavy gates, the cold stone walls, the very ground where her mother had walked to her death, wind whistling through the cracks, crows cawing from the tower roof, and everything reminding her that with just one signature from Mary, her head could fall into the straw basket. That feeling you can almost shiver at the thought. But Elisabeth differed from her mother in one crucial way. She chose silence and patience. While Anne Boleyn had been bold, challenging the court, Elisabeth chose survival. She accepted imprisonment, wrote humble letters to her sister, denied all accusations. And strangely, Mary did not sign her death warrant. Perhaps some trace of mercy lingered in Mary's heart. Or perhaps she simply did not want to turn Elisabeth into a Protestant martyr. I must make a joke to help you sleep. Elisabeth must have thought, this is not the time for a heroic speech like in the movies. This is the time to play the obedient role if I don't want to be the executioner's lunch. After several months in the Tower of London, Elisabeth was released, but still kept under strict watch at Woodstock Palace. For years, she lived in a state of half-freedom, no chains. Yet every step monitored. Even her letters were tightly censored. And what allowed her to endure was patience, a rare virtue in royalty. Another official historical fact, Mary I married Philip II of Spain, hoping to bear a child to secure the throne. But she never conceived. Her repeated false pregnancies shook the court and revealed the fragility of her reign. Meanwhile, Elisabeth waited patiently, kept silent, and let time do its work. A strange detail during her confinement. Elisabeth continued to study, translate books, and sharpen her political thought. It is said she always carried philosophy texts, reading them aloud to her servants, as if to declare, I still have my mind. I am not broken. Once, she even secretly planted a small garden with white and red roses, the symbols of the houses of Lancaster and York, as a subtle message that she would be the reconciler. Historians still debate her true psychology at that time. Some believe she lived in constant fear, never knowing if she would survive the next morning. But others argue that it was precisely this period which hardened her spirit, so that later, when facing assassination plots or foreign invasions, Elisabeth remained calm like a seasoned actor on the stage of history. In the end, time stood with Elisabeth. In the year 1558, Mary I died without an heir, and from a political prisoner, Elisabeth suddenly stepped straight onto the throne, becoming Queen of all England. The people cheered. Church bells rang throughout London. They saw in her deliverance after years of turmoil, and Elisabeth knew from now on, every eye would be fixed on her. Close your eyes and imagine that scene. The grey winter sky, mist covering the spires of Westminster. A girl who had once been imprisoned in the Tower of London, once branded a bastard, now wore the royal robes and sat upon the throne. The cheers erupted. The Tudor flag unfurled, and history began a new chapter, the chapter of Elisabeth I, who would turn England into one of the mightiest empires in Europe. Picture Elizabeth just newly crowned in November of the year 1558. All of London seemed to glow after years sunk in religious strife and the harsh rule of Mary I. Church bells rang. The people shouted, and everyone hoped the young queen would usher in a new era. Yet in that radiant moment, Elizabeth knew well, she had just taken the hottest seat in all of Europe. The official historical fact, Elizabeth was only 25 years old at the time. And the first question that courtiers and all of Europe asked was not what she would do for the nation, but whom will the queen marry in that age? A woman ruling alone was always doubted, and marriage was the way to secure political standing. European monarchs from Spain, France, even noblemen of Austria lined up to propose, seeing Elizabeth as a power vote for alliance. But Elizabeth wisely refused them all. She chose the path of singleness. And from then on, the world gained a new title, the Virgin Queen. This decision remains debated by historians even today. Some believe she never wanted to repeat her mother's tragedy, betrayed by a man and sent to the scaffold. Others argue she simply wanted to keep absolute power. never sharing the throne with anyone. Yet another theory suggests she truly did have secret loves, especially with Robert Dudley, her childhood friend and closest courtier. A curious detail the people said Elizabeth once called Robert Dudley Sweet Robin, and he appeared beside her at nearly every banquet. Rumours even claimed they secretly planned marriage. But when Dudley's wife died in a mysterious fall down the stairs, all suspicion turned upon them. Elizabeth withdrew at once, for she understood too well a queen might be forgiven for not marrying. But she would be ruined if caught in a scandalous affair. Historians still argue, did Elizabeth truly keep herself chaste all her life? Or was she simply too skilled at concealment? For in letters, diaries, and accounts, one can sometimes glimpse her very human emotions. Jealousy, anger, even heartbreak when her rumoured lover married another. Yet whatever the truth, her public decision was clear: I shall only marry England. Beyond the pressure of marriage, Elizabeth faced an even more pressing issue: religion. After the reigns of Henry VIII, Edward VI, and Mary I, England had fallen into a relentless cycle of Catholicism and Protestantism. Both commoners and nobles alike were weary. Each new monarch meant a new religion. Imagine the scene this morning: you attend Protestant service. By afternoon you must kneel to the Pope. And by tomorrow you return to reading the Bible in English. Exhausting. No less than constantly updating your Windows version. The official fact: Elizabeth passed the Act of Supremacy in the year 1559, declaring herself the supreme governor of the Church of England. This was a shrewd move. It preserved the religious independence her father had created, while avoiding extremes that would alienate Catholics. Thus, the Anglican Church was officially established. A careful compromise that kept England from falling apart. A lesser-known detail in drafting this act: Elizabeth spent hours debating with bishops and even ordered no shouting. She said, "He who shouts has lost the argument," a line that, if applied today, might make many company meetings end far quicker. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth truly devout? Some argue she treated religion only as a political tool. Evidence shows she rarely attended church. Yet she was keenly interested in using religion to control her subjects. Others believe that for her, faith and power were inseparable. God and the throne shared the same seat, beyond her own borders. Elizabeth faced colossal powers: Spain and France. Spain was then a superpower with treasure from the Americas, while France always eyed Scotland, the homeland of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, who also had a claim to the English throne. Elizabeth was caught between them, like standing between two cats ready to pounce. The official historical fact: in the year 1588, Spain launched its mighty armada to invade England. Many thought Elizabeth would tremble. Instead, she rode before her troops at Tilbury, clad in silver armour, sword in hand, declaring, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England." The words became legend, stirring her soldiers. And soon a great storm and clever tactics shattered the Spanish armada. It was a glorious victory that made Elizabeth a legend. A curious detail before the battle: rumours spread that Elizabeth had prepared a black mourning gown for herself. She said, "If we fail, I shall die with you." A gesture both practical and wise, for whether victory or defeat, she would still remain the people's queen. Historians still debate, was the triumph due to Elizabeth's military genius, or mere luck when the storm scattered the Spanish fleet? Either way, in the eyes of her people, she was the saviour of England, while Spain lost its crown as master of the seas. At this point, you can see Elizabeth's life as a symphony of highs and lows, from a forsaken bastard child, to a prisoner in the Tower, to a queen undefeated by foreign powers. Each note a twist of fate, each drumbeat a life or death choice. And I must slip in a joke to ease you, perhaps. If Elizabeth lived in the modern age, she would be the model CEO single. fueled by coffee, fond of silent decision-making, and always finding ways to make her rivals fight storms. Instead of her, "Sink into your bed now," I hear the fan's steady turn. And remember, Elisabeth's power came not from a marriage, nor from the shelter of men. It came from resilience, intellect, and a measure of luck. For this reason, she made her era the golden age, when literature, art, exploration, and politics all shone brightly. Loosen your shoulders, close your eyes, and imagine after more than 4 decades upon the throne, Elizabeth I entered her final years, the glory of a queen who had defeated the Spanish Armada. The emblem of the Golden Age slowly gave way to the shadows of age, loneliness, and the secrets of a body decaying beneath powder and paint. The official historical fact by the 1590s, Elizabeth was past 60, a rare age for a woman of the 16th century. Yet instead of retreating into the private chambers, she still ruled, receiving envoys, managing financial crises and wars. The people hailed her as Gloriana, a living goddess among mortals. Yet behind the reverence, Elizabeth lived in fear, fear of being seen as old, fear of being replaced, fear of being forgotten. A curious detail: she ordered every mirror removed from the palace. Not a single one was allowed in her chambers or dressing rooms, for she would not face the harsh truth of her own aging reflection. Portrait painters were forced to filter to the maximum, ignoring the reality of her skin yellowed by lead poisoning and her hair nearly gone. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth truly believe that an immortal image could preserve her power, or was it mere stubborn pride from a woman abandoned since childhood? Some argue she was only performing, crafting a legend. Others believe Elizabeth had convinced herself she did not age, that cosmetics and ceremony could conquer time itself. Imagine the scene of a morning in the Queen's dressing chamber. A dim candle cast its pale glow. The scent of resins, tree sap, lead powder, and mercury mingling in the air. Trembling attendants layered thick coats of white powder onto her face, dabbing red cinnabar on her lips, tracing her eyes with ash. Each time the powder dried, it cracked, exposing small sores. And so another layer was added, day after day. Her face became a mask, beautiful in portraits, but painful in life. And then, the loneliness grew heavier. Elizabeth never married, nor had children. Her closest friends had long since passed. Robert Dudley, her only true companion, was gone. The palace felt larger, emptier. She leaned on young courtiers, sometimes only to fill the silence. I must slip in a light jest to ease you. Some say if Facebook had existed then, Elizabeth would have been the queen of filters, posting edited portrait, but leaving relationship status forever blank. Another official fact: in the year 1601, the court life was shaken by the Essex Rebellion, led by the very favourite Elizabeth once adored, who turned against her. When Essex was captured and executed, Elizabeth was devastated. She felt as if the world itself had abandoned her. Historians mark this as a turning point that plunged her into depression in her final years. A curious detail, it was said, Elizabeth could not sleep for many nights. She sat on cushions, eyes wide open, whispering to her maids, "If I lie down, I shall never rise again." She feared her own bed, as if it were a coffin waiting for her. At times, she even stood for hours in the dark, forbidding anyone to come near, leaving courtiers fearful she had lost her mind. Historians still debate, was it depression, or the toll of lead and mercury poisoning? Modern experts argue her trembling, insomnia, paranoia, and rages fit the symptoms of heavy metal toxicity. Others believe she was simply exhausted after a lifetime of carrying the weight of an immortal image. Now picture her final night. March of the year 1603. The chamber was cold. velvet curtain drawn. Only a few candles flickering. Elisabeth sat motionless, refusing to lie down. Her maids prayed and pleaded, but she only shook her head. At last, drained, she collapsed, whispering her final words, "I belong to God." The official fact: Elisabeth died on March 24th, 1603, closing the Tudor dynasty after more than 100 years. With no heir, she left the throne to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, opening the Stuart Age. A strange detail: Elizabeth's funeral became one of the most haunting events of the time. It was said her coffin gave off a stench so strong that guards had to rotate constantly. Yet to the people, she remained the immortal queen, carried out with hymns of praise. Though in truth her body was falling apart, after decades of cosmetics and chemicals, historians still debate what was Elizabeth's true legacy. Some insist it was the foundation for England's rise as a global empire. Others claim her greatest legacy was legend itself, an image polished to hide the cracks of a deeply fragile human being. Now take a deep breath, hear the steady hum of the fan beside you, and you see, Elizabeth was not only a queen, she was flesh and blood, born of love and betrayal, raised in suspicion, ruling with iron will, and dying in solitude. A life like a long play, whose final act leaves posterity both in awe and in unease. Imagine the grey morning of April 1603, the London sky shrouded in clouds. Funeral bells tolling from Westminster Abbey. Crowds thronged the streets, clutching white flowers and tear-stained cloths. They came to bid farewell to Elizabeth I, the woman who had reigned for nearly half a century, who had defeated the Spanish Armada, who had given them a golden age of culture. Yet behind the solemn grandeur of the funeral, there were details that filled the court with both grief and dread. The official historical fact: Elizabeth I was buried at Westminster Abbey, the resting place of many English kings and queens. Her funeral was held with great ceremony, attended by thousands of people. From nobles and clergy to commoners, the coffin was placed on a carriage draped in black velvet, with white ribbons at each corner. Hundreds of horses drew the hearse, followed by a procession longer than any had ever seen. A little-known detail: her coffin was hastily built and had to be relined several times. As her body decomposed faster than usual, guards recalled that even as the procession moved through the streets, the stench spread, forcing them to change shifts every 10 minutes. Rumors spread that flies swarmed thickly around the coffin, not the wreaths, making many shudder and turn their faces away. Historians still debate: was Elizabeth's body truly decomposing so quickly because of the chemicals from powders and poisons she had used all her life? Some argue it was mere rumor, exaggerated by her enemies, but later medical writings suggest that lead, mercury, and chemical powders could indeed cause bodies to break down and smell horrifically after death. Imagine that day: Elizabeth's coffin draped in black velvet, her crown and scepter glittering atop it. According to tradition, a wax effigy of her face was displayed above, showing fair skin, red lips, serene eyes, a perfect image in stark contrast to the decaying body within. People along the streets wept, bowed, and believed they were bidding farewell to an immortal queen. But the soldiers flanking the coffin sweated and turned pale, the stench seeping through every crack of wood. I must add a touch of humor for relief. Perhaps if Google reviews had existed back then, someone might have written, "A truly great queen." But the funeral logistics of scent need improvement. Another official fact: when the cortege reached Westminster Abbey, priests and choirs sang hymns. The air was solemn, both mournful and majestic. People believed London had never witnessed such a grand funeral. Elisabeth, who had never been a mother, had finally become the mother of the nation in the memory of millions. A curious detail: some witnesses said that when the coffin was lowered into the vault, a sharp crack was heard, as though wood had split. and incense was immediately burned in double measure to mask a strange odor that escaped. Gravediggers admitted they had to press wet cloths to their faces to endure, bringing the coffin down. This tale was later whispered among the people as proof of the cosmetic curse that followed her into the grave. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth's tomb truly emit a sweet but sickly odor? As generations of keepers claimed, some insist it was only legend, woven to enhance her mysterious image. Others suggest that even in death, Elizabeth's body, steeped in chemicals, may indeed have released a strange fragrance. Now let yourself relax. Close your eyes and imagine hymns echoing through Westminster Abbey, candles flickering against cold stone walls. Above, the people still mourned their eternal queen. But beneath the marble lay a body dissolving into darkness. That was Elizabeth's greatest paradox. She lived by illusion. And even in death, the illusion endured to hide the truth. The official historical fact, Elizabeth I left England more stable, wealthy, and powerful than at any time before. In nearly half a century of rule, she not only defeated the Great Spanish Armada in 1588, but also ushered in the Elizabethan age a golden era of literature, art, exploration, and politics. A little-known detail, though, she never married or bore children. Elizabeth was affectionately called Mother of the Nation by her people. Paradoxical as it seems, her choice to remain single, to marry only England, convinced her subjects that she belonged to them more than to any man. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth's celibacy a cold political strategy or a wound left by her family tragedy? Her mother, Anne Boleyn, executed at her father's command. Some say it was wisdom. A queen without a husband never had to share power. Others believe it was fear of betrayal. Yet whatever the cause, that decision made her one of the very few women in history to hold the full weight of a nation's power alone. When it comes to culture, Elizabeth became the patron queen. Under her reign, William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and countless writers, poets, and artists created masterpieces that endure to this day. Plays such as Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and A Midsummer Night's Dream echoed within the Globe Theatre under the indirect support of the Crown. It can be said that without Elizabeth, Shakespeare might never have become the Shakespeare we know today. A curious detail, Elizabeth herself was an artist. She wrote poetry, composed music, and even translated classical works from Latin into English. But she kept these private, showing them only to a few trusted companions. Some scholars argue that in those rare verses we glimpse a very different Elizabeth, not the majestic queen, but a lonely woman, yearning for love, yet never daring to reach for it. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth truly passionate about the arts? Or did she simply use them as political tools to strengthen the image of a brilliant reign? The answer remains uncertain. But perhaps the truth lies in between. She both loved art and understood its value in building a national brand. In economics and seafaring, Elizabeth ignited the age of exploration and expanding trade. Names like Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh set sail across the oceans, bringing back silver, spices, and even tobacco. England, once a small island kingdom, grew into a maritime power, laying the foundations for the mighty empire to come. A little-known fact, Francis Drake once gifted the Queen an entire warship after his successful circumnavigation of the globe. Elizabeth named it the Golden Hind and displayed it as a symbol of bravery. But behind the glory, many of those voyages were outright raids on Spanish ships. If alive today, Drake might be called a licensed pirate, endorsed by the Queen. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth consciously design a colonial empire, or did she simply seize opportunities? Some claim she was the architect of the era when the sun never set on the empire. Others believe she only laid accidental foundations, while the vast empire was built by later generations. And then there is a less tangible but profound legacy, the image of a woman who dared to stand equal with men in politics, war, and religion. In a world where women were often dismissed, Elisabeth proved that intellect and will could break prejudice. A curious note, Elisabeth often deliberately dressed in androgynous attire, sometimes donning silver armor like a general, sometimes wearing blazing wigs and lace gowns. She meant to send the message, "I am both king and queen," and the people believed her. Historians still debate, was the image of the Virgin Queen merely a masterful piece of propaganda, or her true essence? But perhaps that no longer matters, for in the end, Elisabeth transformed singleness into strength, frailty into sovereignty, and left behind an immortal image in history. Now close your eyes for a moment, listening to the fan's steady hum, like the wind in ancient sails. Imagine a radiant England theatres echoing with applause, ships departing the harbour for distant seas, and a queen in a golden gown, standing tall upon her throne. She is gone, her body long decayed, but her legacy endure culture, language, the seas, and the indomitable image of a solitary yet unyielding woman. If put briefly, Elisabeth left three great legacies: a stable nation, a magnificent culture, and the immortal image of a queen. And now, my friend, we arrive at the final passage of our long journey through Elisabeth I. Let me tell it to you in a voice slow and steady, like a whisper in the night, so you may listen, relax, and drift gently into sleep. Elisabeth I, the woman who carried all the paradoxes of history as radiant as a torch, yet as shadowed as the night. She was born from a passion so fierce it split Christendom. For her very birth drove King Henry VIII to sever ties with the Pope and create the Church of England. She grew up in fear and suspicion. Her mother executed, herself branded a bastard, many times pushed to the brink of death. Yet after it all, Elisabeth not only survived, she ascended the throne and became a timeless icon. Imagine this. Her whole life she built a mask with paint and powder, with gowns and ceremony, and with solitude itself. The world saw only the image of the unyielding Virgin Queen. But few remembered the child once trembling by a window, wondering why her mother had to die. Elisabeth's legacy was not only victories on the political stage, but also the lesson that true strength sometimes lies in the ability to hide pain in order to go on living. For nearly half a century she endured every storm, rebellions at home, threats from abroad, even plots to assassinate her. Yet Elisabeth never fell. She turned her singleness into a symbol, declaring she had married England itself. In a society where women were seen mainly as vessels for heirs, that declaration was a thunderclap across Europe. Unter heir, Shakespeare wrote, Francis Drake circled the globe, and English art and culture soared into legend. People believed they were living in a special time, a golden age, with Elisabeth as its soul. Yet behind the brilliance was a body corroded by lead and mercury, a spirit haunted by loneliness, and a heart never wholly loved. In her last years, she ordered every mirror removed, unwilling to face the truth, choosing instead portraits carefully painted to preserve eternity. Picture one late night in Whitehall. Candlelight flickers. The halls are silent. Elisabeth sits in her chair, her gaze to stand. She is too old to dream, yet still forbids herself to be weak. Maids approach softly, but she waves them away, preferring solitude. Perhaps she thinks of her imprisoned childhood, of her mother's beheading, of Robert Dudley, the only man she ever trusted. Then she steels herself again, as if to say, I am still here. I am still the queen. But time spares no one. In 1603, Elisabeth collapsed from exhaustion. She refused to lie down, convinced that if she closed her eyes, she would never open them again. Her attendants pleaded, but she only shook her head. At last, drained of all strength, she breathed her final breaths and England lost its greatest queen. What, then, is Elizabeth's legacy? First, a unified and stable realm. She navigated the storms of religion, balancing Catholic and Protestant, and carved a distinct English identity. Second, culture and the arts. She indirectly patronized Shakespeare, Marlowe, and countless others, elevating English into a great literary language. Third, seafaring and trade. Under here, English ships ventured across oceans, bringing silver, spices, and opening paths for empire. And finally, the most profound yet intangible legacy proof that a woman, once branded a bastard, you could rise to rule a kingdom. She became a symbol of will and resilience, an immortal queen in the nation's memory. Do you hear the steady hum of the fan? It is like the rhythm of time itself, carrying away kings and queens, feasts and battles, leaving only echoes in history. Elizabeth too, her body long gone, but her name endures. Let this story close with one image: Westminster Abbey, Keert, light falling through stained glass onto the tomb where Elizabeth rests beside Mary I, her sister. Once her rival, two women, two fates, now side by side in silence. Above, pilgrims still light candles, lay flowers, and recall the old tales. In each fading petal, in each beam of coloured light, we glimpse Elizabeth, both the fragile child and the mighty queen. Now, allow yourself to close your eyes. All the noise of the day, all its burdens, fade away. Just as the Tudor dynasty once gave way to silence, take a deep breath in. Let it out slowly, and let this story drift with you into dreams. Sleep well,